Okay, here's an interesting article that I found on the origin of blue eyes and where they apparently originate from, or where a discernment is currently made of where that is. It's in an article by Apparently Apparel as a side news article, and it's posted by Monte Aldone. It was done back here in 2014. You can see the blue-eyed picture and the statue of a Greek here on the side of it here. Studies carried out by scientists from the Institute of Forensic Genetics at the University of Copenhagen have concluded that all blue-eyed people on the planet currently share a common ancestor, someone who lived 6,000 to 10,000 years ago near the area by the Black Sea. Now there's a problem with that statement too, because it's currently known that all of the people that had a more Mediterranean skin, or what we used to call the brownies from fairy tales, actually all had blue eyes. In fact, every genetics that we checked on them, and this is going back before that dating, showing that they all had blue eyes. There's also a strange thing that Cro-Magnon man, which we'll talk about here shortly, is always depicted as a blue-eyed man. That's probably for a reason, which we'll discuss here shortly. But then also we know that Neanderthals have always been depicted as green or blue-eyed and with more of an auburn or red hair. And a thought that amelanistic form, showing you that one part of its melanin was not strong at all, giving it a red-haired or an auburn appearance, where that comes from. It's not necessarily an Irish red that makes that happen either, is it? But it's what you would call red hair. Some of those redheads are bright, vibrant redheads, and other ones are dark redheads. You know, like Shaun White, Big Flying Tomato. So there's differences that are formed out of that, and there are also different form of blue eyes. But the thing is that all blue-eyed people are all related to each other now, apparently. They may find a difference in that. When you find a blue-eyed person in a culture that has mainly brown eyes, like predominantly brown eyes, that's usually not a sign of genetics and cross. It's actually a weird genetic mutation, and quite often in that case, instead of being brown-eyed, they'd have a golden-looking iris on their eye instead of a bluish one. Sometimes it becomes that, but it's actually a genetic mutation. Now what we're talking about as far as the Caucasians having blue eyes, it's not a genetic mutation along those ideas, where it's a fluke, and it's not looked upon as the way that it was a fluke and then everybody tried to catch the fluke, and now that's why we have so many blue-eyed people, but yet it became predominant. And even though it's a recessive type gene, and what they refer to as a recessive type gene, it's pretty dominant. And the strange effect that you can actually have brown eyes and marry your husband, and he has green eyes, and you end up having two or three blue-eyed kids, can easily happen because you both can keep that as a recessive gene. So it's a little different than what the names sometimes indicate. Let's look into this here. So they all apparently share an ancestor who lived around the Black Sea at least 6,000 to possibly 10,000 years ago, around the Black Sea area. Strangely, given that area to talk about, it looks like we may be talking about something like Göbekli Tepe's type people too, because we're not far at all from that, and the Amnaya culture and so on. Now we refer to these people as Proto-Indo-Europeans, and we've also taken and torn it apart and started calling them different cultures, like Cucutene and Triptilian cultures. Yamnaya. And so we end up with a lot of these different nomenclatures on them and broke it down. At one time, or let's just say before World War II, it was completely normal to refer to all of these people as Aryans. But that's been taken away. And of course, in the dichotomy and BS, it's about World War II. Of course, we're not talking about that. We're talking about people that come from the end of the last ice age. See, because we really can't get it beyond that point, but we do have that Cro-Magnon thing, so we'll get to that here shortly. Researchers analyzed and compared the unique genetic makeup of chromosomes in the iris of 155 blue-eyed individuals from diverse regions such as Denmark, Turkey, and Jordan. All of the subjects that participated in the study had the exact same genetic mutations in specific chromosomes of the eye, with very little variations on the genes, indicating the mutation responsible for blue eyes first arose and spread relatively recently, and in this 10,000 year range, or just coming out of the last ice age, and we don't really have it before that. I don't know what that was, mumble. It's real hard to get DNA out of something that's 10,000 years old. Ötzi the Iceman had blue eyes. But you see right there where they said that there was very little different variations, very little variation in the genes between these people. So there are some variations in the genes. And so it's not just blue eyes that are carried with this one portion of the signature that are there. Once we get better with DNA too, we'll probably be able to figure out exactly what is the blonde hair gene and this gene and this gene, and you can go ahead and try to get somebody that has genetics in a certain way. I don't know what you think about that though, but that starts sounding like you're creating people rather than having people. Well, I want a kid like this. Well, you've got to have that genetics to make that happen. That's the issue for a lot of things though, but not really the scope of this video. Let's go on. Genetics compared mitochondrial DNA, or female portion of DNA, so this is different here, from blue-eyed individuals in countries as diverse as Jordan, Denmark, and Turkey, concluding that people with blue eyes had a single common ancestor they lived around the Black Sea around 8,000 years ago, spreading out with agriculture. So here's another article putting this together. This one article here that we're going through shows about 7 things that I've shown in variations, and we're kind of reiterating this. So some 8,000 years ago, or at least 6,000 BC, there's that same number, but it comes from at least 10,000 BC, and these are the people that brought agriculture and so on to the rest of the planet, and also the same people that domesticated all the animals that we currently use pretty much across the board, including chickens, cows, goats, and everything else. And they spread that pretty far and wide, and eventually it got real spread, didn't it? But also diseases went along with that, and so things too, because they had never experienced each other. And so the things that they had gotten over a long time ago as a people, without knowing it, really affected other people. Something that has to be understood about certain things. But here we're taking a look at these pictures here, and you can see these quadrants of 3 here, and these are natives of Afghanistan. On the top right is natives of Iran, blue-eyed natives of Pakistan in the bottom left, blue-eyed natives of India in the bottom right. If you look at that guy in the top left-hand corner there, the one that's in the middle, you might notice that he has a swastika around his neck too. But also, all of these countries had swastikas in ancient times, and a lot of other people that we're fixing to talk about. And so that symbol seemed to be carried with those people at that one time. And that's where the conflagration came about with the Germans and so on. But we don't want to go there. That gets to be a real touchy subject for some people that were blue-eyed themselves. Scientists conclude that this blue-eyed family spread out from an area north of the Black Sea following the last ice age, and these people were among the Proto-Indo-European Aryans who subsequently spread agriculture into Western Europe and later rode horses into Iran and India, explains Professor Hans Eiberg of the Department of Cellular and Molecular Medicine at the University of Copenhagen. I'm going to show you that they actually spread it a lot farther than what's shown there too. For even though we talk about how the Celts and Germans and Slavs, and even as far as into China, the Tocharians, and where those pyramids are all there, kind of growing plants over the top of them, hiding them now, and I've made videos about that. But if you'll look closer at it, they try to show you that in the bottom right-hand corner there's the Aryans and Indo-Aryans. That's the people that went into India, and then the people above that are the Bactrian type people that, they domesticated camels and horses too for us, all in the future, and that all eventually made it everywhere, including down into Egypt. Speaking of which, if you look at the bottom middle part of that, it shows Sumerians veering off one way, and the other way making it down to the apex, and then it says pre-dynastic Egyptians. So someone actually has put two and two together. I've made an entire video about this concept and the people that we know as the Natufians and how this was brought to them. But I've also made connections that show the ancient Sumerians have connection with the Gibel Arak knife and even the iconography that's in the Narmer palette and so on. So this is something that was before and spread into both and then collective, and people want to dismiss this, but if you look, they all both had cuneiform type writing. It's just, and both of them started with ideograms. It's just copying each other off of it. Well, which one came first? Well, in reality, it looks like the Sumerians came first. But because the Sumerians made their houses out of brick, which in the, the Three Little Pigs tale was the best thing going on, and we still have it nowadays. If you were to actually build your house out of solid stone, like a castle, it would actually last a lot longer than any house that was made out of bricks would. Wouldn't it? So in that effect, and of course the Great Pyramid, and all the pyramids they have there become the great wonder of the world. It's the only one that's left out of the group. So that's pretty neat. And so people want to collect onto that probably more than the ancient Sumerians. That and the fact that only 100 years ago did we actually figure out that, wow, Babylon's got all this stuff going on to it. And hey, here's these stories that are just like in the Bible but written before. How does that work out? And what does that mean? Noah's flood and quite a few more once people started really analyzing it. And I've shown you a lot of that. And I'm currently showing you other videos with the zodiac that they had and so on. Blue eyes are a recessive trait, and the gene must be inherited from both parents, as I was speaking about before. Green eyes involve a related but different gene that is recessive to brown but dominant to blue. So to get blue going on, you'd have to really make sure, and not that you're making sure or ensuring that, but it's funny how it keeps connecting to the point that there are a large portion of blue-eyed people. But how far does their range stretch? Well, I just made a video about that recently, and this is kind of like reiterating some of that, but some of the other information together, all trapped in one. This is like 3 of my videos in one. Following the end of the last ice age, or during the last ice age, many Europeans inherited this rare gene associated with blue-eyed people that differentiated them from the rest of the human races. And there were, of course, variations on a theme there. Whenever we say variations on a theme, again, the people like Cheddarman and so on, which they rolled out with mahogany shoe polish on them to try to really, it's a pandering situation. Whenever within a week it was totally dismissed and everybody apologized for it, but you can't quit people from talking about it now and still bringing it up like it's a reality that that person could have been possibly that dark. whenever they found a man that has genetics that match him, and he's pale as hell, but then he admitted, I used to get tan a whole lot, especially when I went fishing more. Not the same, is it? Following the ending of the last ice age, though, many Europeans inherited this, and it made them somewhat unique. Indeed, it appears that the elite and nobility that organized the earliest known agricultural civilizations on Earth all shared this trait, seemingly coming from the same bloodline. I refer to them as the heralds of civilization. You can find that in Egypt, and I've shown a lot of pictures of this before. One of my intros, rather than the phoenix we looked at, actually is just made up of that, and the Sumerians and so on. For you can see Egypt and Sumer, but there are also statues in Peru with these people with beards, and Amerindians don't have beards, but you can see it on this guy with the blue eyes, and blue eyes in India. But there's reason for that too, and I'll explain the thing in India too. And a couple of those pictures showing up here are going to be from in the Thailand area and in Buddhist temples too, showing a stretch that it goes on there. When we look into Egypt, arguably one of the world's oldest known civilization next to Sumerians, we find many blonde and fair-haired mummies. In fact, in a pre-dynastic state, we actually find ginger. It's a blonde male who's been stabbed in the back during a confrontation and buried naturally, turned into a mummy desiccated by the sand. He's named Ginger because he's got blonde curly hair. He used to have a little picture outside of it that showed you something that looked like a Greek, an ancient Greek with curly blonde hair, and go like this. And by curly we mean Farrah Fawcett. We don't mean something that looks like naps or anything. Although you can have a fro like that. Let's continue. Since World War II, though, Western academia, backed and lobbied by political motivated forces at the United Nations, have pushed for a Marxist-inspired multicultural view of history, which has ignored the archaeological evidence in favor of political correctness, as they call it, and they try to get everybody hooked on being politically correct, and then they push this agenda and you feel like you have to go along with it whenever you know the truth. Well, they want to take that away from you too, because if they keep showing you the truth, then you won't be able to go along with their deal because it'll be a known lie. It'll be like adults continuing to believe that Santa Claus still exists. However, well-intentioned, this false perspective has cast much confusion over human origins. You've got all kinds of people saying all kinds of things, and then you have a lot of people who probably know better, but they want to act ambiguous about the situation and act unsure. Before World War II, in this event that we just talked about earlier, it was something that was well assured, but it ended up taking and making some people do a bad thing and use a symbol that was around for thousands of years. So diddle political propaganda and the people that run the media, they've ended up turning it into a real bad sign, but that also tries to take away the truth and reality of things. Anyhow, however well-intentioned, this false perspective has cast much confusion over these human origins, though. See, if you look here, what we're looking at is the blonde hair of the Egyptian mummies that you see pictured here and above, in that row that's on the top there of the two. It's a result, what they said was the production of the mummy production process, what I'm trying to say, or the mummification process using natron. And so one would ask, well, then why are the statues of royal Egyptian pharaohs and nobility pictured below depicted with blue eyes? This is in no way an example of all the ones that are there. This is an anomaly too, because they made these polished crystal blue eyes. They inset them inside of a stone that they found, like a pink granite or a white granite, where it has little pink lines in it. So it makes it look like the eye veins, and they carved those all out. and they inset it in there, and they put a black dot in the carved out little channel that the blue crystal eye sets in, and then it looks like there's a dot behind it, and it kind of follows you around the room. And these were from the earliest of dynasties. The anomaly here, I guess, is that Nefertiti right in the middle has one eye missing, but the other one is still blue crystal eye. But a lot of people, due to the looting that went on so many times there, think that perhaps she got her crystal blue eyes from someone who looted somebody way back in the earliest dynasties before the 8th, well, I guess 12th dynasty is the last time we see the crystal blue eyes. And then all of a sudden it shows up again at Nefertiti way down here. So a bit of an anomaly there, but that's another case of them having an incredible technology that they lost. But they also went through a few intermediate periods where everything fell apart. You know, whenever they were living basically off of a river, whenever they had a drought, it really screwed people up. And whenever they got their population up to where it's huge, like our major cities are now and everything, if all of a sudden the crops failed one year, it really screwed people over. If it did it for a few years in succession, it really start causing problems. But here we can see that the males are red ochreish type color and the females are done paler here. That's a Caucasian edict that's been around forever. It really shows up naturally, but also in all paintings and so on too. And women used to be very much into that. I always keep remembering whenever I was a kid that girls started trying to tan as much as they could and get that look where they were a beach girl type of thing. And they would put stickers on them like a Playboy outline and so on, and they could see exactly how much tan they were getting. People don't do that anymore though. They try to put on Sunblock 9000, which if you just exposed somewhat limited to the sun after a few days, you end up getting a tan, and then all of a sudden you can take twice as much as you could have last week or the week before, and it gets more and more and better through that. But women still want to stay pale because there's an ability to do so. This red ochre males and pale females you can find in Minoan art, Sumerian art, Persian art at the time, Mitanni, Etruscans, the Greeks, and we're not confused about any of those people or the ethnicity of these guys either. I think the weird thing is that a lot of people would think that they didn't have blue eyes, and they weren't those people that are known to have it. Genetics have just stepped up to the plate recently and said, oh, well, no, that's the same people. They have the same genetics. It's the same thing. So, like King Tut being R1B and so on. But that's for other videos. So, however well-intentioned, the false perspective had cast much confusion over human origins, they said, and who are and how we came to be as people, and the way that's derived, because it looks like one of them was quite well advanced and in its modern form tens of thousands of years before the others. It also looks like the things that they brought to civilization got shared with everyone else. The heralds of civilization, if you will. It's a correct statement. It keeps sticking. So another one of the oldest documented civilization credited with having the first writing before the Egyptians even, and schools and courts and many other firsts, were the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. The ancient Sumerians thought that blue eyes were a sign of the gods themselves. In fact, An and Enki are said to have had blue eyes, and Enlil too, because he's a storm god and part of the sky, and the others are also. And strangely, that's the way Neptune and Uranus look, is kind of aqua eyes, kind of blue eyes. And that's the ones, the stars that they were connected to. Sumerian nobility were blue-eyed and fair-haired, as most of their busts show. Not all of them, but there's a famous depiction of what's called an Assyrian fighting with a lion, and he's blonde-haired. There are descriptions, too, of how Enki would get dark in the sun and his hair would become lighter and get highlights in it and everything, but let's continue. These blue-eyed statues pictured here below are of the Sumerians from the early mid to 3rd millennium BC, when things were really kicking with them. Sumerians certainly only belong to the same racial division of mankind as the nations of Europe, as they are the scions of the Caucasian stock. This was said by Arthur Keith, quoted in excavations in where Abraham comes from, in 1927. You can see they've got lapis lazuli inset eyes. In fact, the lapis lazuli comes from this area and northeast of this area, an Elamite territory, if you will, showing you a vast trade, because you've seen how much lapis lazuli, and they love that blue color, in the Egyptian statues and headdresses. The famous one is King Tut's, where it's all inlaid with every other row on his headdress with these custom lapis lazuli cuts. You can imagine how many big pieces it took to make those, because they bend and arch and so on. But that's not the only one. But quite often, whenever people were digging these things out, they kept that and they sold the mummy. You see. But it's pretty easy to see it in these Egyptians, but also in the Sumerians that are here. Gautama Buddha's physical body is traditionally regarded as having the 32 characteristics of a great man. It says so, and these 32 characteristics are described throughout the Pali Canon. They're also regarded as being present in Chakravartin kings as well. Number 29 on this list is eyes, deep blue. Here we're seeing Buddhist temples all through India and through the Near East, some even in Thailand, of Buddha and Gautama Buddha, and it's pretty easy to see his phenotype here. You look at his eyes and it seems like they've given him a local stylized eye though, but then they had to be true to form here, didn't they? For they made him with blue eyes. Well, it actually says it. Going on with the scope of people that have blue eyes here, 2,000 years ago, a mysterious little-known civilization with blue-eyed elite people ruled the northern coast of Peru. Its people were called the Moche, that I've talked about before. They built huge pyramids that still dominate the surrounding countryside, and some well over 100 feet tall. Archaeologists working at Peru's Huaca Plana ruins recently pulled a blue-eyed mummy from ancient tomb thought to be from the ancient Wari culture that flourished before the Incas. Piercing blue eyes, undimmed by the passing of 1,300 years, made out of lapis lazuli looking material here. This is the Lady of the Mask, a mummy with striking blue eyes and a light brown to blonde hair, whose discovery could reveal the secrets of a lost culture at the Huaca Plana Pyramid located in Lima, Peru. It's the first time a tomb from the region's Wari cultures has been discovered intact, and gives historians the chance to learn about the ancient pre-Incan civilizations. So this is the true Wari people of Lima, Peru, and you can see the area on the map there that shows you here in orange. The Lord of Saipan's tomb, pictured here below, is held by some archaeologists to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the region of the world in the last 30 years. As the main tomb was found intact and untouched by thieves, he's got wives that go with him and servants that go with him too, taking him and going with him to the afterlife. They're all buried around him, as you can see on the right hand side. But behold, he also has these blue eyes. There's another effect where he was called Viracocha by the Incas, Kulkulkan by the Mayas, Quetzalcoatl by the Aztecs, and Gucumatz in Central America. Votan, which sounds a lot like Wodan, in Palenque and Zamna and Ismal. And in some cases, his men were described as being tall, bearded, with white skin and beautiful emerald blue eyes. Fray Juan Torquemada, the Franciscan missioner who collected traditions about Quetzalcoatl from the natives of Old Mexico and their traditions, says that Quetzalcoatl had blonde hair and wore a black robe sewn with little crosses of red color. This image we're going to see below is published by the Secretary of Education of Mexico, and its effect. This is Quetzalcoatl. I know the man in the middle looks like Jesus. And there's no mistaking what this man on the left looks like. Scientists stress that the genetic variation that the press release puts it that neither a positive nor negative mutation. That's a bit disingenuous, as the mutation also produces greater incidence of blonde hair along with it, which are coupled with it, sexually selected for even today, and fair skin, which confers a survival advantage by stimulating greater production of vitamin D in sun-starved northern European countries near the Arctic Circle, where blue eyes are still most prevalent. Yet they have this magic adaptable melanin that can let you tan and get quite dark. So you're auto-adaptable to what needs to happen, but also it allows a lot of vitamin D production, which is real important, growing bones and things like that. You can see the concentration here across northwestern Europe and concentrations of blue eyes. But it used to be a little bit stronger than this at one time, and a lot of people that have the blue-eyed trait, which are showing in a very small percentage-wise, have now mingled into the area of the people that do. In fact, we know about the Proto-Europeans, Anglo-Saxons, and all of that. I don't have to talk about that and how these people used to be from the Middle East. 95% of Europeans and Scandinavian countries have blue eyes. Are also found to have a greater range of blonde hair and light skin color, porcelain-ish, but then most of the other people don't have a porcelain skin color. There seems to be a variation in that too, for they can still get tan, as if you've not seen the Swedish bikini team at all, but in the same breath, they seem to have more of a porcelain type skin than anybody else. Well, it seems to work off the effect of how much sun you get. If you get enough sun, you're going to stay dark through the winter and not quite pale all the way out, or you won't wax pale, as they talk about of Jacob in the Bible, and so you won't pale all the way out, and therefore you start with a little bit, and the next year, if you're out enough, you get a stronger tan on you and it starts to build, where it takes a while for it to actually exfoliate down to where you have porcelain skin, or you can have a lack of it. But you better be drinking a lot of milk when that happens, or they wouldn't exist actually. It's amazing. There has to be something in there that's really kicking your vitamin D production, or they'd all have rickets and things like that, which is definitely not shown in these people. So these mutations, as they are called, are relatively recent, as Europe was colonized only a few thousand years ago, say mainstream scientists. Through interbreeding, the brunette with blue eyes, or a Neanderthal type, which have auburn hair and sometimes green eyes, was evidenced about 35,000 to 25,000 years ago and waning out by invading Cro-Magnon types from the Atlantic, which is a tall, Rh-negative blood type that contained a Solutrean toolkit. Now, this Solutrean toolkit is the same toolkit that we find in the Americas in the earliest form that we find, which now date back well over 18,000 years ago, and therefore puts it well before the ability of being able to come across on the ice bridge. And by the deposits that we found of them already, it looks like they came from the other way. And if you correlate that with Clovis, it looks like Clovis came down from those people. So literally that all has to be changed. In fact, now they found footprints that I made a video about. They're about the same dating, if not a little older. And that kind of ruins the idea of Clovis first, or even second perhaps. And then there's another people showing an occupation in a cave, which dates back to like 32,000 BC. in Central America. But nobody wants to talk about that because they're still stuck on the idea that we did something to the Indians. Well, the Indians came in and destroyed all of those people over there, or somebody would have been there from before. Don't want to get into any of that. Let's continue. But this Solutrean toolkit is the first toolkit found in the Americas, and it's also found on the east coast, or the west of West Europe, and the coast that's there. And so, as opposed to the idea of one group running through all the other groups, all the way up through what we know of as Russia and up around Eurasia and down, and keep going until they hit the American east coast, and then start spreading out from there, it's much more easy to think that they actually went across from Western Europe, curled around off the ice bridge that was there, and ended up in Europe. I've recently also showed how the dogs that are in the Americas have been related to the people that we know of as the Vikings. It's in another video though, but that also shows you something, that the depth that they went to. They've now found another site that's much more closer in on Nova Scotia and Canada than the L'Anse Meadows one that we all know about, where the Vikings had at least already made it to there, and a place they called Vinland. Let's continue. Scientists claim Cro-Magnon DNA fully modern, unchanged for 28,980 years. A Cro-Magnon DNA sequence of that age, 28,000 years or more old, was obtained from fossil bones discovered in Puglisi Cave in Italy that I did videos about. The results show that DNA is identical to the DNA sequence of certain modern Europeans. The DNA sequence has remained static and unchanged for over 28,000 years. It's about the oldest DNA we've gotten out of somebody like that. This means that Cro-Magnon was a fully modern individual, perhaps had a larger brain capacity. Well, they did, and Neanderthals kind of did too. And of course, these guys averaged well over 6 foot tall. So we have the effect that they would have just been bigger brained, bigger boned, so on too. Here you can see one that was all buried with this headdress and beads all around onto him, all over his fancy clothes. The thing is what they don't show in here is the picture of the guy for whenever they found him, the way that these beads are laid out and so on, and it works. It looks like that's a belt. He actually had pants on, not just some skirt or something like that, but 2 separate leggings at this date. But also the interesting thing is that DNA is still here. So where did this rapid evolution and change from just being in the sun a little different? Well, it didn't happen like that. They are admitting now, but no one's paying attention to it, that Cro-Magnon type of men came out, or Homo sapiens came out, much earlier than they thought before. See, no one ever tried to answer the question, where did Neanderthals come from? Because they're just out there whenever the Homo sapiens come out of Africa, aren't they? And now we found there's Denisovans that are just out there. Well, now we found a whole bunch of artifacts that show that Caucasoids were just out there too. And then there's this Cro-Magnon form, and where does it all of a sudden come from? Because all the other hybrids are upsteps. And I can't find the thing that would be an upstep to. I'm not calling aliens out here or anything, guys. It's just like, where did the perfect piece of popcorn happen at? By the way, his genetics end up adding up to being the one that, being in Cro-Magnon, that breaks down in other haplotypes, such as R. I believe his was N, and then R comes from that. T, a bunch of other ones are spread, and they're known now to come from that. The odd thing here is we find the exact same haplogroup matching a person again. Not just a few thousand years old, but 30,000. So, in contrast, most mammals on Earth share the normal form of the gene that does this blue-eyed thing and so on. The 6-letter sequence is exactly the same among mice, horses, cows, rats, dogs, monkeys, chimpanzee, and humans with brown eyes. No word yet on what gives Siberian huskies and Siamese cats blue eyes, But if you look at the actual effect of who it was that actually originally domesticated those creatures, you might see a preference for blue eyes in them too. And you would think that the people had the blue eye before they preferred it in the dog. Giving you another idea of the age that could go back. In other words, as they said at the very first of this, everybody lives right now with blue eyes are said to be related to somebody that was alive at the end of last ice age. But what they're not saying is it's entirely possible that that person's great granddad had blue eyes too, and everybody in between that. It would make sense. Where do we find the mutation that all of a sudden looks like this on the left? Well, they're trying to pinpoint it, but they didn't pinpoint the origin. They pinpointed that everybody should and converge back to a bunch of people that used to live in the Caucasus Mountain, Black Sea area, kind of that area that Noah comes from for a reason. That idea that goes from there, as if those people could remember back tens of thousands of years and realize where it all came from, or perhaps they knew the answer to that question a little bit better than people of today do. People of today don't know all of the ancient knowledge that used to be around, because the problem is with the current religion that we have, we try to drive that out of everybody to the point that all that we could think about was the idea of that happening, which I've done a lot of other videos about. But in doing so, we lost so much. You think of the Library of Alexandria and its knowledge and so on that went on there, and everything disappeared and went through the Dark Ages and come up out of that. But coming up out of that back to what we were before, there were steam engines that had been created before that time. A lot of great things happen, and things that we still revel in, and some of them we still marvel at and don't even know the answer of how they were able to pull it off. But I guess again, that's for another video. Those amazing blue-eyed Caucasians, it's amazing where they've spread to and what they ended up doing for humanity. I think the sad